Hey y'all, it's Jon Ray, and today I'm doing a mystical interpretation of Genesis 2, 4 through 17. This is the story of the Garden of Eden and the formation of humanity from dust. And this isn't a story about dirt or forbidden fruit or any of the things that you may have heard growing up. This is actually a map of your inner world, and this is the first time the Bible shows us the experience of consciousness in form, what it looks like to be human, to desire, to create, and to choose between the voice of love and the voice of separation. Neville Goddard said the Garden of Eden is a state of consciousness. It's the state of divine union with your imagination, your I am, your awareness. But most of us fall from that state daily. We get into a reactive mode where we're just reacting to the world around us instead of consciously observing and creating from a higher state of consciousness. And this passage shows us what it looks like to live in harmony with what we've assumed to be living from the place of already receiving the territory, already being in covenant with God. And it also shows us what happens when we step outside of that harmony. So let's break it down and go verse by verse. Genesis 2, 4 through 5 reads, "This is the history of the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that Yahweh God made the earth and the heavens. No plant of the field was yet in the earth, and no herb of the field had yet sprung up, for Yahweh had not caused it to rain on the earth. There was not a man to till the ground." So here, the Bible is giving us a pause, a reset. We just went through 7 days of creation, but now it zooms in to show what that creation looks like from within. And so what this verse is saying is your outer world doesn't grow until something happens inside of you. There's no plant of the field. There's no visible result because your inner world hasn't been activated yet. And there was not a man to till the ground means you haven't really stepped in to your higher consciousness role yet. This is what it feels like when you've done some inner work, but haven't committed fully to living in the identity that matches your desire. You're between those worlds. You believe something new is possible, but you're still waiting for evidence to reveal itself. And this verse says that the evidence isn't going to come until you till the ground, until you live from the end, not just visit it in meditation, but actually live and walk around in the feeling of already having it. Genesis 2:6 goes on and says, "But a mist went up from the earth and watered the whole surface of the ground." And this is where emotion and imagination begin to stir. The mist is your first breath of vision, the internal feeling that something is rising, even if it's not really clear yet. This is when you're starting to get an inkling of an idea. And really what we're showcasing all over again is the creation process. You know, you've probably had that moment where there's no plan, no steps, just a subtle sense that something is coming. You know you're about to receive something, and that's the mist. And that place, that mist is powerful. It's water before form. The sense that something real is starting to awaken inside of you if you're willing to tend to it. And tending to it means that you have to give it light, and you can't be a cynic. You can't have an inkling of an inspiration or a dream or an idea and then be like, that's not for me. I can't do that. Who am I to think that? You have to be able to till the ground and really move into the ideas that are put on your heart. Genesis 2:7 says, "Yahweh God formed man from the dust of the ground and breathed into his nostrils the breath of life, and man became a living soul." This is your origin story, not as a body, but as a being of conscious awareness. Dust of the ground equals your physical form, your identity, your story, but it's not alive until what? until breath, until divine consciousness enters it. You're unaware up until that point. And so free will is you having this divine consciousness breathed into you, where you become an individuated awareness unit of the larger awareness, which is God. And this is the moment you wake up and you say, I am. It's where you have your first awareness. And you've probably experienced this when you've caught yourself in a loop and then paused and said, wait, no, that's not who I am anymore. And when you have that awareness, when you catch yourself from doing something and you can make a new choice, that's the breath. That's free will. That's life returning to form. And this process isn't about achieving something. It's about inhabiting the form that you've already created. And this is where your desires start to flow through you, not just to you, because it's almost like you're in a co-creative reception mode where God and the Holy Spirit are forming those desires on your heart. These are pure desires that are not in reaction to the things around you. They're not materialistic in the sense that you're trying to outdo your neighbor. They're pure desires on the heart and showing you the gifts that God has given you that you're ready to birth into the world so that you can provide value to your community. Genesis 2:8 says, Yahweh God planted a garden eastward in Eden, and there he put the man whom he had formed. And so the garden isn't a physical location. It's a state of alignment. It's a state of consciousness. And so when you live from your I am, that's your state of awareness where you're observing what's happening in your inner world. And you're not in reaction to the things that you're observing, but in ownership of them. And so when you are the observer of your own internal states, and you've built out that firmament, that space where you can see what's happening inside of you without projecting it forward, when you can feel the feelings of it and transmute it, that means you're in Eden. And eastward always represents newness in the Bible. It represents awakening, the beginning of something real. So when you fully embody your new identity, the garden becomes your home. You start to live from a place where the things that you need just flow naturally. You stop chasing things. You stop forcing. You stop the hustle harder. And you're not just manifesting, you're abiding. The dude abides. If you've seen The Big Lebowski, you're abiding from that place where you are the thing that you were trying to create, and you're no longer trying to create it, you're living from it. Genesis 2:9 says, out of the ground Yahweh God made every tree to grow that is pleasant to the sight and good for food, including the tree of life in the middle of the garden, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So, here comes the symbols, and there's a lot of baggage that gets caught up in this passage, so let's really unpack it. The tree of life is the state of union with God, with your divine identity, and the tree of knowledge of good and evil just means separation, judgment, duality. It's when you no longer feel, experience, or activate your co-creative ability with God, and this is the moment that your conscious mind is introduced really to the concept of choice. You can live from the knowing that all is one, that your imagination is creating everything, or you can eat from the tree of good and evil, meaning you judge what is good or bad based on appearances and separate yourself from your own power. And when you're in pure awareness, when you're in that I am state, when you're seeing through the eyes of God, you recognize that it's all good, man. Everything is happening the way that it's supposed to, because reality is a feedback loop. It's a mechanism for you and humans to be able to have awareness of their own choices and evolve in love to reduce entropy in the consciousness simulation that we're living in. And so everything is happening as it's supposed to, because if I'm evil in my heart and that evil gets projected back to me, then ultimately that becomes a feedback loop where maybe at some point I find a rock bottom and I start to make new choices. So you may have felt this before. You wake up in your knowing, you feel whole, you imagine clearly, and then someone just says something to you, or you see something in the news or in your timeline, and you just start to spiral. Maybe it's a bumper sticker on the back of the car, and you just go, this is bad. I can't believe this person. It's not working. I'm not manifesting what I want. Something's wrong. That's eating from the wrong tree. This verse and this passage is saying, the moment you start labeling what is instead of trusting what you've created, you fall from the garden, because you're always going to misperceive from lower states of consciousness. I'll summarize these next passages, Genesis 2:10 through 14. These verses describe the 4 rivers that are flowing from Eden, and this is Pishon, Gihon, Tigris, and the Euphrates. And these rivers are streams of consciousness. They represent the flow of life from the inner world, which is your garden, into all of these different areas of experience that you inhabit. And so when you're in alignment, your energy doesn't just stay contained. It flows into your work, into your relationships, your finances, your health. And each of these rivers represents a direction your inner state can influence. And just like rivers, these flows can dry up when you disconnect from your source. But when you return to your I am, when you recognize that you are a drop in the ocean of God's awareness, everything starts to flow again. And Genesis 2:15 says that Yahweh God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to cultivate and keep it. And so this is your assignment, your mandate. You don't just visit the garden, you tend it. You maintain the state. And Neville Goddard would say you must remain faithful to the assumption. Even when it gets boring, even when nothing seems to be happening, you have to know that the territory has already been given to you, and you have to live from that state. This verse says that your primary job is to live in the new identity, the identity that God has given you as part of the covenant, until it becomes your natural home. And it's not about forcing fruit to grow. It's about nurturing the soil of your consciousness and not measuring too quickly, not pulling the seeds out of the ground before they've sprouted. Genesis 2:16 through 17 says, Yahweh God commanded the man, saying, you may freely eat of every tree of the garden, but you shall not eat of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for in the day that you eat of it, you will surely die. And this is the core warning of the manifestation process. Don't fall back into judgment. Don't fall back into being reactionary to the world around you. The moment that you label something as bad, the moment you let fear tell you your vision isn't working, the moment you think, maybe I did it wrong, you're exiting the Sabbath. You leave the garden in that moment and you die, not physically, but energetically. Your ability to easily flow resources through you, that dies, and your awareness collapses from being in creation mode and falls back into unconscious reactionary mode. And this verse isn't about punishment. Nothing in the Bible is really about punishment. It's just showcasing how the mirror of reality works. God is a mirror. And if you look in the mirror and you're making an ugly face, the mirror is going to show that back to you. That's how reality works. Reality reads what's in your heart, not who you're pretending to be, not who you're thinking about being, who you actually are as a being in your heart. And you can influence who you are in your heart by practicing an end state and allowing God to put on your heart through the Holy Spirit the wisdom required to have and hold a desire that is that big, and to call that in, to claim the territory that's given to you in the covenant. And really, vibration is what we're building out here. We're recognizing that when we feel a certain way about our co-creative ability with God, when we recognize that God's hand is always moving in our favor, we recognize vibratory sensation of what it feels like to be acting in concert in God. And so stay in the tree of life. That's really the mandate. Stay in the state of it is done, because that's where Eden lives. So we'll get more into this in further videos, but let's anchor this in with a prayer practice. We're going to call it Return to the Garden. And this is a practice for when you've slipped into judgment or doubt or fear. Maybe you're watching too much of the news and you have a bunch of resentments towards who you've labeled the other side. This is all knowledge of good and evil stuff. We have to get back into pure awareness and trust that the mirror of reality and consciousness itself, the awareness of God, knows how to balance itself. And so in those moments, we close our eyes, we take a deep breath, and just imagine a lush garden. It's peaceful, abundant, alive. And as you hover over that garden, ask yourself, what version of me lives here? What would I be feeling if I fully trusted my creation? And now, from that place of just being ready to receive, ready to have something put on your heart, now say, I return to the garden. I release judgment. I live from the tree of life, my divine identity. And feel yourself begin to return to peace. If there still feels like there's agitation in your body, that's okay. Learn to become the observer of that. Notice what's happening in your body without needing to project that energy forward. Learn how to hold space for that temporary discomfort, and it will transmute itself back into creative potential. And that creative potential will be a strengthening of the covenant with God. The Holy Spirit will put something on your heart that will be so inspired that you can't not take action. And in this place of peace, as you hover over the garden and recognize yourself as the person who lives in the garden, this is where manifestation begins to stabilize. In our next video, we'll explore what happens when the mind starts to doubt itself, and the concept of Eve is introduced, and we'll begin to journey into separation and projection and how to reclaim your power after you've given it away. So to get an email when the next video is released or to request a Bible verse interpretation, head to BibleMystic.com. If you've ever had a day where you felt powerful in the morning and disconnected by noon, like, comment, and subscribe. We need to be growing in community. It's important for us to affirm each other's experiences as we co-create with God together. And I want you to share in the comments, what helps you stay in your garden and what pulls you out? Let us know. We'll see you in the next one. Bye, y'all.